The topic will be the space-based economy, the practical implications. So I want to welcome, without further ado, Mrs. Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts.
Thank you. It was fascinating. I was in the ladies' room and I heard Jay say, okay, we're about to begin. I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. Okay, so you know me, Miss Money. My topic is money. We're going to be talking about the space-based economy. And let me just describe what we're going to say. First, I want to thank the incredible people of Bastrop, Texas, and the greater Austin area. This is, for those of you who know me, I live in Tennessee, and I think the Heartland is getting really very competitive in America. But this is an area that brings together the most sophisticated technology in the world with great down-home America values. I was driving to the motel last night. I don't know if anybody said it. Did you see the Halloween parade? What a great community. And this is a fabulous facility, so I just want to give them a round of applause. Do you have a water? Oh, it's down there. Okay, so let's go over what we're going to talk about today. I came to this topic not because I was interested in space, but because I was looking for $4 trillion that had gone missing from the U.S. government. And, you know, I had to follow it into space. I remember when I first got on Coast to Coast in 2005, I was following the money. And one of the things I said to them is, why does nobody want to talk about infrastructure and roads and bridges and how to make communities safe for children? And one of the things I discovered, it was really the Coast to Coast audience that taught me, and people like Linda, who was on Coast to Coast, is so much of the power and control is coming at us from space. So we're gonna visit looking at the money. Then I want to talk about mapping the economics. I want to talk about what are the economics of space and how is it impacting our current economy, both the economic side of that and politics. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the low Earth orbit, which today is where 90% of the economics are. So when we talk about space, remember, we're not just talking about what's out there. We're talking about what's down here, but is transmitted and engineered and controlled from out there. Then I want to touch on law and space, some of the unanswered questions, and then I want to get back to practical implications to you. Okay, at the bottom, I'm going to reference sources at the Solari report, and I want to make sure you have access to it, so we're going to offer a 1-week complimentary access to everybody, both in the audience and who's coming in by stream. And the username is gift@solari.com, and the password is ticket, okay? And I'll give that to you again at the end. One of the things you can do when you can log in, we're going to put these PowerPoints up on the website at solari.com. So if you want to just pay attention and don't want to have to take notes, you can get a copy of this and download this later, okay? Right. I'm always missing things because I'm taking notes. Okay, so let's dive in. Okay, so I'm really big on staying in a state of amusement as I try and deal with this topic. You know, I, for one, find it very frustrating to live on a planet that's still a mystery. So I try and stay in a state of amusement. We have a cartoonist at Solari, and I just want to show you a couple of our cartoons. It's a businessman with an attaché case, and he's saying, "Black ops, schmops, why should I sweat and care about what a bunch of UFO-chasing weirdos are doing 100 feet below the desert in Nevada?" And meantime, there's a hand coming through the wall, taking his wallet out. It says, "Cha-ching." And what I have to tell you is every household budget in the world, in the planet, is financing the things we're talking about, the breakaway civilization, whatever proportion is going into space and whatever is going underground. So you and I are financing this both with our taxes and the overt side and a lot more covertly. Okay, the OECD keeps track of what the overt government budgets are in the space area. Currently, last year we spent about $65 billion on official space programs. The largest by far was the United States. China and Russia are rising. United States is coming down a little bit. These are the figures for 2013. Okay? But, you know, you may think $65 billion is a lot of money, but compared to what's disappearing, it's not.
Pentagon,
so let's take a look.
The day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared...
Oh, and let me just say one thing before I go on. I showed this last year. This will be up on Solari.com. It's 7 minutes long, but it's very important that you get the enormity financially of what we're talking about. So I want to play it again this year.
War, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
First question. My second question, Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week. Question, please.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract? And how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top of my head, well, I would rather not. I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's not privileged information, is it?
I'm sure it's not.
Well, please. And we still have time, so please.
I would be glad to provide for the record. I don't want to talk from the top of my head.
Scope is hard to imagine. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa joining us now to help us figure out what this all means. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us for Happy Hour. I saw you quoted, you're using the analogy to the birth of Christ, that we wouldn't have spent as much money since his birth, that this big old bailout. Very interesting to come up with that.
Well, it's even worse than that. It's if we spent $1 million a day every day since the birth of Christ, we wouldn't get to $1 trillion. And we're likely to lose far more than that. You know, having $23.7 trillion at risk basically is about 1.5 times all the money that every man, woman, and child in America produces. The entire gross domestic product's only about $17 trillion. So this is an amazing amount of money at risk. And it's okay to have it at risk in order to get America moving again. What's not okay is what we're going to hear from the special IG tomorrow, which is he's being locked out of any kind of oversight, reporting, transparency, all the things we were promised. He's
missing, Ed, is this. We had a national tragedy, an economic disaster that took place barely a year ago. In the last 18 months of the Bush administration, America lost $12 trillion on its net worth. That's $40,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country, and I cannot think of a single person who's held responsible for that. Nobody in government, nobody on Wall Street, nobody nowhere. That's the fundamental problem right now. And if people on Wall Street are going to continue to get great bonuses in good times and in bad times, we can kiss this economy goodbye. It's not going to work. In capitalism, winners have to win and losers have to lose, and nobody's been held responsible for that enormous erosion. 20% of our accumulated wealth over the course of 2 centuries gone in 18 months. Nobody's been punished for that. That's the problem.
So altogether, $26 trillion of bailouts just in those 2 categories, not including TARP, not including FDIC financing of U.S. institutions. $26 trillion, that's almost $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in America, all done by the Federal Reserve without any act of Congress authorizing it.
All right, there's a lot of numbers thrown around here, and sometimes when you just hear it abstractly, 13 billion sounds like it's larger than 7 trillion. Which of all of these numbers, which outrages you the most and which should outrage the public the most?
I think that we can all agree the trillions of dollars that were extended by the Federal Reserve to the banks in the form of corporate welfare. What they did is they took our money, the U.S. dollar, the fact that they control the currency, the fact that they have control of the money supply, and for the first time in history, and I'm talking about in the 100-year history of the Federal Reserve, they played favorites. They said, we'll give $100 trillion to this institution, $100 billion to this institution, another $100 billion to this institution, and so on down the line, when you and I couldn't even come close to accessing that kind of money on those terms. They lent out this money at 0.01% interest. 0.01% interest. Go try to get a loan like that from your bank. Bloomberg's report that there are trillions of dollars in off-balance sheets transactions that the Federal Reserve has entered into since last September. Are you familiar with those off-balance sheet transactions?
You know, I think it may be important at this point, too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify perhaps some of my earlier comments, we are the Inspector General for the Board of Governors, and we have direct oversight over board programs and operations, and are also able to look at board-delegated functions to the reserve banks, as well as the board's oversight and supervision of the reserve banks. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit reserve bank activities.
Okay, so let me just tell you what she just said. She just said it's not our business. Okay, so essentially, over the last 2 decades, my back-of-the-envelope estimate is approximately $40 trillion has been shifted out of both private households and out of the U.S. government and a variety of places. And the question is, where did it go? There's a big question mark on the planetary balance sheet. Now, let me give you a sense of how much $40 trillion is. $40 trillion invested in a very prudent, conservative way would generate enough income annually to run a global government. Okay, so it could have gone into an endowment, could have gone into space, it could have been going into the black budget, but this has been going on for a long time, and the accumulated capital we're talking about is the kind of capital that can field the many different things that have been we've been talking about today. You know, it's really funny when most people see a UFO, they think, you know, do aliens exist? And what I automatically think is, I wonder how much Boeing would charge to build that. And I wonder what their profit margins are, and how much, what are they trading, and what's their PE? Anyway, so there's a big question mark. And one of the hardest challenges of making sense of financial commentary today is we are getting a lot of financial commentary, both in the corporate media and the alternative media, that is pretending that that question mark doesn't exist. And obviously that is, you heard Joseph say it on the video that we made for the conference, but I'll say it again, that is a material omission. There is a big question mark, and you can't ignore that question mark. It's way too big. So I just have to close this section with one of my favorite cartoons that we ever did at Solari. You have, and I just have to, I always pick on Lockheed Martin because they are the #1 contractor in the US government in terms of total dollar contracts. They also run the information systems at the Department of Defense. So everyone knows that apparently except for the controller of the Department of Defense. But so we have a little UFO that says Lockheed Martian up at the top. And on one side it says, we convene this hearing to investigate the loss of $4 trillion the Department of Defense has somehow misplaced. Mr. Secretary, please pass out the DOD ledgers. And the DOD Secretary says, Mr. Chairman, wouldn't you know it, but it appears a UFO has abducted our accountant and all his files. Okay, so, but if you look at what's been happening in the equity markets over the last 20 years, it is very relevant to what we've been talking about. So Linda talked a lot, Jim Mars talked a lot about the technology that's been re-engineered and reverse engineered out of the black budget and into these various companies who've been managing it. And they've been paid fantastic amounts of money. I talked last time about all the money they've been paid and sort of the contractual arrangements that facilitates this reverse engineering and the transfer out. But you'll notice from this chart, I chart 3 things. The NASDAQ, which includes a lot of the tech company stocks, so it's a good indicator of the tech sector. Then the S&P 500 is the lowest line, and then Lockheed Martin stock. And what you can see is the NASDAQ is significantly outperforming the broad indicator of the general corporate economy in the US, the S&P, and Lockheed Martin is outperforming even that. Okay, and that's with defense contracts, and the defense budget getting steadily cut over the last couple of years. So you wonder, when I said that 40 trillion is enough to create an endowment to do lots of things after that defense budget gets cut, it makes you wonder. Okay. When, as you know, after the bailouts, there was great effort to pass lots of laws that would make it much tougher for chief financial officers not to be held accountable for what was going on inside the company. And right at that time, we popped out with a new waiver that the National Security Advisor can give. It's a waiver that will allow him to delegate to companies the ability to waive the compliance of SEC transparency rules. So now all these companies can do black budget projects, book the income, and just like Enron, it's a mystery where that income's really coming from. Okay, so I divide space up into 2 areas for purposes of discussing economics. The first is the low Earth orbit, and the low Earth orbit is about re-engineering, delivering, managing the flows related to resources primarily on Earth. Okay. And from an economic standpoint right now, that's where 90% of the economic action is. The other area is space exploration, so that's beyond. And it's profoundly different economics between the low Earth orbit and space exploration. So let me just read you a quote from Warren Buffett's 2008 shareholder letter at Berkshire Hathaway. The worst sort of business is one that grows rapidly, requires significant capital to engender the growth, and then earns little or no money. Think airlines. Here, a durable competitive advantage has proven elusive ever since the days of the Wright brothers. Indeed, if a far-sighted capitalist had been president at Kitty Hawk, he would have done his successors a huge favor by shooting Orville down. Now, what is he saying? What he's saying is that the airline industry, as of 2008, the investors were net at a loss position for the entire history of the airline industry. And to a certain extent, that's because the economic power of flight came not from providing the flight necessarily, but from the intelligence and the strategic advantage you got from being able to fly faster than the other guy. But it brings up the issue of the fact that exploration can be very risky, very expensive, and very harmful to a society. It's a big risk management issue to figure out, okay, how can we go out in space and do major exploration and handle the political and economic risks? And I flew over here from Edinburgh, and I was at the Scottish National Museum, and I'd forgotten about the Darien Project, and was reminded, and I thought, oh, that's perfect. That's a perfect example to use for space exploration. In the late 1600s, Scotland decided it wanted to be a world-class power, and so it financed the Darien Project, where it set up 2 colonies in Panama. It didn't work. They went bust, and it literally wiped out about 20 to 25% of the capital in Scotland at the time, and was one of the reasons that Scotland then folded into the UK in the early 1700s. You almost wonder if the British weren't using disaster capitalism to get their way with money in a way that they'd never been able to get their way on the battlefield. But it was a reminder throughout history, exploration has been very politically and economically risky. And so we're looking at sort of 2 economic spaces. One is the low Earth orbital platform, which is where the economics and the current cash flows are very compelling, and this other one where it's unbelievably expensive. Now, it's interesting because one of the things we've seen over the last couple of years is tremendous effort to get the American people and the global population excited about financing that really expensive part. Okay, so now if you look at the fashion magazines, right? Everything's about the moon and Mars and whatever. One of my favorite comments is, well, let's keep going. Space is suddenly full of celebrities. You know, so NASA announces water on Mars, and suddenly The Martian is biggest grossing movie that weekend, and you almost wonder, I wonder what Rupert Murdoch did to get them to do that. Anyway, he owns the company that was distributing the movie. But so space is full of celebrities. One of my great jokes about Mars is that in the first, I think it was the first 3 to 6 months of Obamacare, more people signed up for a one-way trip to Mars than signed up for Obamacare. Which, you know, so never tell me that the American people do not know what's going on. They know what's going on. Okay, so anyway, but space is now very, you know, it's very sexy because you got all these Matt Damons out there, and we want to go too. And then finally, every community wants a spaceport. I drive around America a lot. You would not believe spaceports are popping up everywhere. And this is the spaceport in New Mexico. I think it's called the American Spaceport, but every community now wants them because space tourism and space is going to be a big, you know, it's sort of an economic deal. Finally, I worked in the first George H.W. Bush administration, and Bush had an expression about consolidating capital into, you know, tighter and righter hands. That's what he called it, tighter and righter hands. And one of the reasons you consolidate capital into tighter and righter hands is so that you can pull the capital you need to do the really high-risk, expensive projects. And whether it's making them fashionable or financing those projects, that's what we see. Now, part of it is not just that. There is a real push, and has been for several years now, to privatize a lot of the space effort and operations. Part of it is because if you look at the economics, not of the exploration part of the effort, but at the low Earth orbit, getting the cost of delivering payloads up into orbit way, way down is absolutely essential to being competitive in the 21st century. So, you know, for 500 years, the central banking warfare model has depended on controlling the sea lanes. Well, now it's not just the sea lanes, now it's the satellite lanes. And so now you've got to control. Part of the problem with keeping the Bretton Woods system going is now you've not only got to police the sea lanes, you've got to police the satellite lanes as well. And we're coming into a period, I'll get into it in a second, we're coming into a period where there's about to be a big traffic jam, because thank you, Edward Snowden, now every country in the BRIC nations and beyond thinks that they need their own global GPS system and satellites and everything else. Okay, so you see Musk working on reusable rockets, and he talks about how essential that is to get to Mars. It's not Mars, it's essential to get that low Earth orbit really competitive. Okay, now, how do you build that kind of breakthrough productivity? I think one of the things that's happening is you have a whole world of new technology being transferred out of the lab at high speed. Robotics, 3D printing, breakthroughs in material sciences which are dazzling, the smart grid, Internet of Things, all of those kinds of things. And all of these things together are delivering not only rapid change, but dramatically improving productivity. And so you're seeing, I read one CEO estimated that 10 years ago, he could get a 5 times benefit from outsourcing manufacturing to China. Robotics and these other technologies had brought it down to 2.5. and he thought we were headed to something where we were going to be more competitive. Okay? So we're talking about building a domestic manufacturing infrastructure, not just here, but in other countries around the world, where they can break free a huge amount of industrial capacity to support the cost of going into space. Okay? And one of the countries that has the most fantastic engineering talent and has talked a lot about this is Japan. So I just thought I'd use some examples from Japan. This was about, I think, 2 years ago in the Wall Street Journal. Japan's tech giants turned to outer space for growth, which means, you know, okay, we're about spend here, let's head on out. Okay, don't laugh. If we can get graphene down to a highly economic production, you in fact can build elevators into space, and it would be, if you could do that on an economic basis, it would be much cheaper to maintain things like the space station and other things going on in the low Earth orbit platform. And of course, the big question mark is energy. You know, if everybody's got a smartphone and a smart meter, can we collect up energy with solar or other means and deliver it from space? Okay. Okay, so a lot going on. As I said, the low Earth orbit is 90% of the economics, so I want to spend my time today on that and dive in a little bit deeper. Did you ever notice that if you get on the internet and you start to Google on space, what do you find? You find lots of stuff on the moon and Mars. You very rarely is this ever made to be interesting or sexy. All the disinformation is focused beyond the low, the low Earth orbit space, and I think that's one of the reasons they don't want you really paying attention to what's going on. As I said, the goal of what's going on in that space is, and I'll just say it a couple times because this is what I really want you to take away. It's about the control and concentration of flows on planet Earth, including cash flow. Okay? So think of the satellite system as we shift more out of the underground cables and move it up into the sky. It is very much about the control and concentration of cash flow. Okay, so there have been approximately 7,000 satellites launched to date. The Russians were the first with Sputnik. There are about 1,300 operational. Debris is a big and growing problem. The Union of Concerned Scientists estimate that the United States has almost more than a third of that, about 40% of that. Russia, my guess is, has more than is shown here, but Russia and China are growing fast, and the U.S. is, we're seeing the government cuts are sort of cutting a little bit into what the U.S. has been doing. The global satellite industry revenues are about $200 billion, but again, same with airlines, that's not where the money is. The money is not in fielding and operating the satellites, the money is in the digital stuff going through the satellites. Okay, so one of the things that will really help you understand what's been happening for the last half century on this planet is as we've built out the satellite system, we have dramatically changed the feasibility politically and economically of what I call rebalancing the global economy. Something started in the 90s where we literally changed the rules on how the global economy works, and we're now dramatically, you know, we basically said, okay, now the emerging markets and the developed world can compete head to head, and we're going to go global, and that's part of this shift to sort of a global governance process. That was very much driven by what was possible in terms of the satellite system because it made it much more economic to enforce. So let me explain a little bit more about what I mean by that. Let's look at what is pumping through those satellites. We've got communications, phones, data, internet, media. We've got financial systems, pricing, payment, clearance, and transactions for currencies, securities, assets. One of the most important things in the financial system is who can get the data from here to there the fastest. And split seconds, as you can tell from the program trading, make an enormous amount of difference in terms of money. And we're seeing slowly more and more shift into the satellites. So how much will be done by cable or on the ground versus satellites? It's not something I know. But I know that satellites are becoming more and more important to the financial system, particularly when it comes to bringing and getting deeply into the emerging market populations. GPS positioning and navigation is essential. weather astronomy and research, Earth observation and remote sensing, cloud and database storage, and of course weaponry is, to me, a very, very important one. You have surveillance, you have intelligence, you have coordination of man forces, but if you look at what the military is trying to build, they're trying to build a world where, for example, in the United States, you can pull back behind the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, which have traditionally been a great protector of the nation, and you can project force with unmanned everything, right? Unmanned drone planes, unmanned drone ships, robotic armies, right? Okay, and that's all going to depend on satellites, either for operations or intelligence. Finally, one that I write a lot about and cover a lot at Solari because I think it's important is we are now dealing in a world not just of hard weapons, but soft weapons. And soft weapons increasingly are not just surveillance, but entrainment and electronic harassment. So literally mind control that's coming through all of these systems in a digital electronic form. And finally, big question mark, energy. Are we going to use these systems to collect energy from the sun? Are we going to use them to transmit or distribute energy? Okay, so in the, every year we have an annual wrap-up and then quarterly wrap-ups. In the 2010 wrap-up, I was trying to explain to people that the rebalancing of the global economy was very much a function of the technology that made it feasible. And I wrote, if you look at the competition for resources globally, the shift of investment eastward means that the military must enforce. Nobody puts money where they can't enforce. Let me say it again. Nobody puts money where they can't enforce. That means as the money moves globally, so must the military. It's simply the nature of the investment model. How is the military going to watch what's going on globally and enforce globally on an economic basis? That's the, I love Jay's presentation about the, what was it, Skynet? No, Skynet's the actual word, but the satellite system that he was describing in the James Bond movies. Okay. Okay, so we are rebalancing the global economy, and it's very easy to underestimate the power of the tsunami that has been unleashed. Right now, the per capita income in the United States is $52,000. In China, it's up to almost $10,000. In India, it's still, 2 years ago, it was still $4,000. Imagine a world where they're all $52,000, or they're all $100,000. I don't know, it could go many different ways. But that's a very, very different world than the one we're living in. And part of the tensions we're all dealing with is the competition as we now compete directly, globally, and our opportunities are direct and global. So it's a very big switch. For that rebalancing to happen, if you're Russia, if you're India, if you're China, and you want to be at the 52,000, then you need to have a global GPS system. You need to have a lot more satellites than you do. And remember when I said I think there's a traffic jam coming in low Earth orbit? Some people say there's a traffic jam now. We certainly have a debris problem. We have, if you look at the number of countries who are adding on space programs and starting to increase their space budget, everybody's realizing, oh, you know, do I want to depend on the United States for my clearance systems and my payment systems, or do I need to get some satellites up there and do it myself? You know, think of it this way. You know, sometimes I think that the satellite industry financed Edward Snowden. They said, oh, well, how can we get a pickup in demand? But he certainly helped them do it. Okay. Part of this is global internet users. In 1995, less than 1% of the global population was on the internet. As of 2005, 1 billion was on the internet. 2010, 2 billion were on the internet. 2014, 3 billion. Several days ago, it was estimated $3.234 billion. Sorry, I think money. 3.234 billion people on the internet. One of my favorite essayists, in fact, who comes from Texas, Michael Ventura once wrote, and he said, we're standing in the storm of our own being, because now we have 3.2 billion people who can talk to each other directly. What we're trying to figure out is how we can do that in a way that's energizing for all of us. Okay, but that's a huge explosion, and it's very recent. Okay, and a lot of it comes to the fact that we've dramatically brought down the cost of a smartphone, and you're getting smartphone adoption, and so most of the access is through pads or phones, no longer through computers. Okay, now, what does that mean? Why is this important? One of the most important drivers of economics in space and in the low Earth orbit is what? What's the most profitable thing to control on the planet? Fiat currency. Okay? One of the quotes I always use is, my quote is, Mr. Global doesn't care whether we call it dollars or wampum beads as long as it's digital. And that's because if you can field a global digital currency through low-cost payment systems, and we're not there yet, you need a lot more satellites, and you need a lot more sort of Apple Pay, Google Wallets, and PayPal and other products going into the emerging markets. If you look at our transaction costs in the Western and the developed world, there's no way the emerging and frontier markets can fund or bear that level of transaction costs. So one of the things they're trying to do is dramatically drive the transaction costs down to zero. And that requires satellites, and that requires digital systems and payment systems beyond what we have now. But this is, you know, if I was to look at the low Earth orbit and I would say, what is the biggest game going up there other than military? It's driving towards a fiat currency, and what's going to happen in terms of the design of the digital payment systems. Okay, we've all heard a lot about how much debt we have. Debt's exploded over the last 20 years. Coming into the bailouts, the developed world was very in debt, and then during the bailout period, we levered up the developing world. And so now you have about 40 countries that have more than 100% GDP in terms of debt, and that's considered sort of a tipping point. And you know, I have many financial commentators who always say, oh, it's the end of the world, it's never going to work, you know, this is terrible. Well, here's the reality. If you look at a lot of that debt, the people who issue that debt can pay that debt in currency that they can print. Okay, so one of Alan Greenspan's great quotes of the American government can't default. It prints the currency. Okay, because we can't default. We can just, if I can print the money off of my computer that pays my credit card's debts, then I can run my credit card debts up all day long because I can just print the money off of my computer. Okay, so one of the biggest issues is who can issue debt and who can get another country to accept their currency. And what you discover, a lot of it depends on what their military capacity is. And now their military capacity depends on what they have floating around in space. It's very interesting. If you look at the Chinese latest white paper on their military strategy for the next 5 years, what do they talk about? They talk about building a global GPS satellite system. Why? Because they want their currency to be adopted, and they want to build payment systems that go global. And part of it is you want your fiat currency to go global so you can afford the military expenditures you need to keep the currency going. It's all in the central banking warfare model. Okay, which leads us to another one of the most powerful and important uses of this low Earth orbit, and that's what I call, or Glenn Greenwald called, the one-way mirror. Does everybody know that expression? They can see you, but you can't see them. We are now building a surveillance platform which is so invasive and extraordinary. It's unbelievable. I went through a process in the 90s where I litigated with the federal government. I think a lot of you know about that, but one of the things I discovered was the extraordinary power of their invasive surveillance system. I got quite an education. Several of the Solari reports that I absolutely encourage you to access, you can access them in audio form or download the transcripts. One is by Dr. Nafiz Ahmed, wonderful investigative journalist called The CIA, NSA, and Google, on the history of the development of Google. A second is an interview I did with Adam Trombley, Entrainment, Subliminal Programming, and Financial Manipulation. I think you cannot navigate the modern world unless you are very knowledgeable about entrainment and its application. Some people refer to it as mind control, But I think we're dealing with more than just propaganda these days. I think we're dealing with very sophisticated technology that's designed to literally change our mind and to act in ways which are not in our self-interest. I'm an investment advisor, that's my day job. And one of the reasons I did this audio seminar is I kept running into clients who were literally being tricked by this technology to do with something, to make investments that had a 100% chance of losing the money. And I couldn't get them to see logic even with math, and it was very frustrating. And I said, okay, we've got to confront this as a real issue. And then finally, soft weapons. I did a discussion with Charles Hugh Smith about the extent to which this kind of technology is being used to engineer political developments both in this country and around the world. Okay, so as those of you who know me, where's Joseph Farrell? Where's Joe? Is Joseph here? Okay. Joseph knows I have a real thing about the women's thing. And if you want to know more about it, I wrote a series this year called Promoting Women. There is an incredible effort by the leadership of the United States to promote women. It's part of why they're running Clinton for president on the Democratic side. And for a long time, I was trying to figure out, what is this about? What is this about? There's a great interview from a guy from U.S. Trust the other day in Business Intelligence, and I said, oh, that's what it's about. What he was saying was, the global female population has a GNP which is bigger than China. Okay? So the US plus the global female population, which is truly suboptimized, there's a lot of opportunities to increase that, that income with new technology. So the US plus the global female population pulls the rug out from under China. Wouldn't surprise me if this strategy contributed to the Chinese just canceling the one-child-only policy. They don't want to get out-politicked on this one. Right. But remember, we're in a very interesting time because you take satellites that on a very economic basis can interact financially and with mind control technology globally in every place in the world through your smartphone, direct through your smartphone, remember? And what you're talking about is the ability to tender for a global population through their smartphone. You know, are they a citizen of country ABC or are they a citizen of Apple? We're all sitting here, I'm sitting here with my Apple. Okay, so watch this, because this is going to be a very important strategy to the US, and don't think that that satellite system and all these systems isn't critical to it. It's basically control. I did a great wrap-up in the first quarter called Planet Debt, and I get into the nitty-gritty of control is not control of countries or municipalities or government leaders. Control is control of every one of you and I using relational database technology, artificial intelligence, and a lot of these different technologies. Okay, and if you don't believe me, you know, it's all in the movies. I always say in America, fact is fiction and fiction is fact. Get a load, who here has seen Kingsman? Raise your hand if you've seen Kingsman, okay. Very important movie to understand the dangers and powers of some of this technology. Now, I don't think they've got it there yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's where they're headed. For those of you who haven't seen it, Kingsman is a absolutely dreadful movie with Colin Firth, who's a great actor. And this is a scene where through some smartphones within a Pentecostal church in the southern United States, they get 200 people to basically in the middle of service stand up and kill each other. And everybody dies by the hands of the congregation. Okay, now, I just saw an article yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to confirm it, saying that the administration was ready to concede and leave Assad in place in Syria. I don't know if that's true, but if it is, one of the reasons is because the Russians put up an electronic blanket over Syria. And it appears that they may have been able to literally white out the surveillance and soft revolution technologies of what the United States was doing. This is all part of the fight over the payment systems and the delivery systems. This is a headline, U.S. reportedly worried Russia may cut deep-sea internet cables during conflicts. And you can see why. Because if you can shoot the satellites out of the sky and cut the cables, then you can stop the soft revolution. You can also stop people's transactions. Okay, all economies are built on the basis of law. All economies work from the legal systems that they're a part of. Ultimately, political jurisdiction determines the rules of who can and cannot make money. I'm not going to go into it today, but I asked one of our favorite attorneys to write a special report for us. It's up on the website at Solari.com called United States Law Concerning Outer Space. And it's the first of a series we want to do on this topic, and if you're interested, I would really encourage you to take a look at it. But I wanted to bring up what I think is the most important point. The Treaty of Westphalia, also referred to as the Peace of Westphalia, was the political agreement that occurred in 1648, which some historians say was the end of the medieval period. And it was the end of medieval period because it basically came up with a philosophy of sovereignty that said the only person that can apply force within a jurisdiction is the sovereign government. It gave a monopoly on force to the sovereign government within a jurisdiction. Before that point, you had lots of people who could, you had feudal lords who had power, the government had power, the Vatican had, armies, there were all sorts of mercenaries roaming the place, and so if you're a citizen, you're having to deal with force from multiple parties, and you don't know who's really in charge and who's really in control. Well, for a variety of reasons, one of very much is the satellites and the ability of satellites to do things over a jurisdiction without the jurisdiction necessarily realizing it, is we are literally, the United States over the last 30 years has torn up the Peace of Westphalia, and we are back into a high-tech medieval process where there's a whole variety of parties within any given jurisdiction that can and will use force to get their way, including corporations. Okay, which brings us to the big question, who is Mr. Global? Mr. Global is the word I use to describe the governance process on planet Earth. So in my mind, just to make life simple, someplace there's a room with lots of computer screens and there's a guy named Mr. Global and he's running everything. If you ever saw the movie The Truman Show, Ed Harris played Mr. Global. So who is Mr. Global? Because we live on a planet where we do not understand the governance process. One thing, I've worked in the U.S. government, and I can assure you, the U.S. government is like a bus, and the president's up there with his hands on the wheel, but the wheel doesn't go down to the wheels on the bus. There's someone downstairs, named Lockheed Martian, really driving the bus. So the question is, well, who are they working for? When I was the Assistant Secretary of Housing, I used to ask the defense contractors to give me data that was required for me to run my operation by law, and they refused, and I couldn't make them. So the question is, who are they really reporting to? Well, I wanted to just show you. Here's Jupiter ascending. Just raise your hands. Who here has seen Jupiter ascending? I'm just going to show you 1-minute clip from Jupiter ascending.
Your Earth is a very small part of a very large industry.
Oh, wait. Let me.
Right now, Berlin owns the title.
That was very quiet. Can we make it louder? Okay, so she's going to start off and say, the Earth is just a very, very small part. So let me try that again. Let everybody be quiet.
Your Earth is a very small part of a very large industry. Right now, Berlin owns the title to Earth. Once you claim it, the Earth will belong to you.
I will harvest that planet tomorrow before I let her take it from me.
We need a plan. We need firepower.
So now you see why they needed $40 trillion. Maybe. Okay, so here are the unanswered questions of the secret space program. Is Earth an opened or closed economy? It's very interesting. I went to business school. I worked on Wall Street for 11 years. I've been involved in the economy my whole life. And the whole time I was invited to assume that Earth was a closed economy. So if we issued debt, then other humans owned that debt. If we issued stock, other humans owned that stock. But if you look at all the economic experiences I've had over my whole life in government, business, everything else, what I will tell you is, if you ask me to describe the economic model on planet Earth, I would say, well, planet Earth is a real estate investment trust because we're paying a dividend someplace every year, and I don't know where it's going. It's going into that question mark on the planetary balance sheet. But let me bring it down to some of the important questions you have to ask if you ask the question, is this an open or closed economy? I told you we did this great wrap-up called Planet Debt, and I got great statistics on who had issued debt. But for the life of me, I couldn't get great statistics on who owned it. I don't know who owns it. I know they control, and they control through the debt, because that's how you control a company in invisible ways, by controlling through the debt. Who owns the debt? I don't know. But let me ask you this, is it humans or is it somebody else? What if I were to tell you that 70% of the debt, government debt on this planet, was owned off-planet? I don't know. Do you? Big question. The gold inventory, there are people who say that gold is the currency that will allow us to trade across planets. But for the life of me, I've spent many years trying to figure out what the gold inventory is on this planet, and I can't do it. You know, it's something I always call Dr. Farrell and speculate about this, but in 2011, somebody jammed the price of gold down and then moved an unbelievable amount of inventory out of the single largest inventory in the overt economy for the GLD ETF. And it literally went like boom, boom. And I called Joseph and I said, did they just buy the moon? Well, that's what it looked like. It looks like you were stockpile coming into a big transaction, and then boom. I don't know. Who's behind the one-way mirror? Is it humans that control this amazing low-orbit infrastructure, or is it somebody else? Who controls the smart grid? That's scary. Black budgets, dark pools, hidden system of finance. What I want to know is why we have a world of unbelievably talented, capable financial people talking about trading, investing trillions of dollars of capital on the assumption that it's a closed system when it might not be. That's really scary. Digital currencies, who's going to control? Now, if it's a closed economy, you may talk me into believing that Bitcoin really might not be hackable. If it's an open economy, there's no way you're going to talk me into that, given what we've seen here. Okay? Another very important question is, what are the economic costs of disinformation? Because I have to tell you, I have a thing called shadow work, and if you're interested, go read the article at Solari.com after you log in on shadow work. But I will tell you, every person in this audience is struggling with a hidden system of taxation called fraud that's really a way of financing a lot of this stuff. But you're also struggling with a very different, here's the official reality, and here's reality. And we've got to drive around, and if we really pretend that the official reality is true, then it's going to be bumper cars. We're going to keep making mistakes and knocking into things, on and on and on. And I know whether it's the hidden fraud taxation, credit card fraud, identity theft, on, whether it's the hidden taxation from fraud or the shadow work, every person in this room is buried with the costs of that, okay? Which gets me to the last question, practical implications to you. Now, as you know, if you've ever been on Solari, I could talk about this for a week. So I don't have a week, but I want to tell you a story. I did a wonderful interview with Dr. William Tiller, who's used to be head of material sciences at Stanford. And I'm very interested in community prayer, and I was doing the pre-interview, and I said to him, Dr. Tiller, I'm very interested in community prayer. He had done tests and experiments where he had proven that human intention can change material reality, including at great distance. So Linda and Jim talked about remote viewing and sort of what people can see. He's literally saying not only can you remote view, but you can shift the building. So I said to him, Dr. Tiller, what do you think of community prayer? And he said, oh, well, you have to be really careful, because if the people doing the praying are coherent, it can help. But if they're incoherent, it can make things worse. And I said, it was a big wake-up call to me. I said, oh, what I need to be is to be more coherent. My contribution to the world can be more coherent in myself. And so whatever you do, every person is different, every situation is different, every family is different, so you're unique. But what is most important, I think, is whatever you choose to do, it's very, very important that you do it in a way that increases your personal coherence. Okay? Number two, we're all going to have to navigate a world where the official reality is different than reality for many different reasons. And you know, the reality is some of us want to enjoy our lives, and some of us just want to understand where we are. You know, I think most of the people who are here today are here because they want to understand, but not everybody does. They just want to enjoy. So we have to find ways of navigating which help us avoid the hidden taxation, avoid the shadow work, but we can have an energizing life living and working with people who just want to enjoy their life and don't really want to know. The one of the things that is the most important to me is I spend a great deal of time battling with people who have become victims of what I call fear porn. The economy is going to collapse, the economy is going to collapse, the economy is going to collapse. Well, a great deal of productivity is being broken free from the economy to go do these things. And we're seeing very dramatic shifts that can be very scary, and certainly certain parts of the economy are collapsing, or they're being collapsed. But we're also seeing $40 trillion reinvested in areas that are growing like gangbusters. I mean, go to Austin, go to Silicon Valley. It's growing like gangbusters. And it's very important that we be prepared to shift, because those changes are going to accelerate both as more and more of this technology comes out of the lab and that rebalancing of the global economy. So the one thing I would really stress to everybody here, look at your income, look at your assets, look at your knowledge, and say, okay, I call it the shift from global 2.0, which is an industrial economy, to global 3.0, which is a networked economy. How can I start to learn and work and generate income, because that's the direction it's going to go. And it's going and it's accelerating. I did a third quarter report in 2014 where I broke down the different areas that I think in global 3.0 are growing. There's a wonderful, wonderful friend and ally here, and who brought one of their family members who just graduated from school. I said, oh, what was your degree in? And he said, engineering. I said, perfect. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, 1 week access to the Solari report, gift at solari.com/ticket. You can download as much as you want. If you have any problems downloading, just send an email to customerservice@solari.com. Once you log in, you can post questions for me, either at subscriber input or on any particular commentary. And I would encourage you, if you have questions from this presentation, let me know. And this PowerPoint will be up on the top commentary on the website, so you can have that too. Let me just say again, it is such a privilege and a pleasure and an opportunity for me and all the speakers to speak here today. You make it possible for us to do what we do. We love what we do, and we love sort of being engaged with you in this search of trying to figure out what is going on inside this puzzle palace we live in. And you know, one of the great benefits of coming together like this, both here in Texas and on the global stream that's reaching out all over the world, is it makes it really possible to take big leaps forward. We took big leaps forward last year. I can already tell from where we are now, you know, at least I'm taking a big leap forward. I don't know, are you taking a big leap forward? Yeah. And that's possible because we have an unbelievable team of people with extraordinary integrity who've done this year after year after year, both for Secret Space Program and Global Energy, Breakthrough Energy. So I just want to say thank you again to Jeroen van Straten and Maddie and Robert and their team. Would you guys just stand up and just take a bow? Oh, they don't like to stand up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Something good is going to happen to you today.
All right, that was great. One more time.
Why does nobody want to talk about infrastructure and roads and bridges and how to make communities safe for children? And one of the things I discovered, and it was really the Coast to Coast audience that taught me, and people like Linda, who was on Coast to Coast, is so much of the power and control is coming at us from space. So we're gonna visit looking at the money. Then I want to talk about mapping the economics. I want to talk about what are the economics of space and how is it impacting our current economy, both the economic side of that and politics. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the low Earth orbit, which today is where 90% of the economics are. So when we talk about space, remember, we're not just talking about what's out there. We're talking about what's down here, but is transmitted and engineered and controlled from out there. Then I want to touch on law and space, some of the unanswered questions, and then I want to get back to practical implications to you. Okay, at the bottom, I'm going to reference sources at the Solari report, and I want to make sure you have access to it, so we're going to offer a 1-week complimentary access to everybody, both in the audience and who's coming in by stream. And the username is gift@solari.com, and the password is ticket, okay? And I'll give that to you again at the end. One of the things you can do when you can log in, we're going to put these PowerPoints up on the website at solari.com. So if you want to just pay attention and don't want to have to take notes, you can get a copy of this and download this later, okay? Right. I'm always missing things because I'm taking notes. Okay. Okay, so let's dive in. Okay, so I'm really big on staying in a state of amusement as I try and deal with this topic. You know, I, for one, find it very frustrating to live on a planet that's still a mystery. So I try and stay in a state of amusement. We have a cartoonist at Solari, and I just want to show you a couple of our cartoons. It's a businessman with an attaché case, and he's saying, "Black ops, schmops, why should I sweat and care about what a bunch of UFO-chasing weirdos are doing 100 feet below the desert in Nevada?" And meantime, there's a hand coming through the wall, taking his wallet out. It says, "Cha-ching." And what I have to tell you is every household budget in the world, in the planet, is financing the things we're talking about, the breakaway civilization, whatever proportion is going into space and whatever is going underground. So you and I are financing this both with our taxes on the overt side and a lot more covertly. Okay, the OECD keeps track of what the overt government budgets are in the space area. Currently, last year we spent about $65 billion on official space programs. The largest by far was the United States. China and Russia are rising. United States is coming down a little bit. These are the figures for 2013. Okay, but you know, you may think $65 billion is a lot of money, but compared to what's disappearing, it's not.
Pentagon,
so let's take a look.
The day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared.
Oh, and let me just say one thing before I go on. I showed this last year. This will be up on Solari.com. It's 7 minutes long, but it's very important that you get the enormity financially of what we're talking about. So I want to play it again this year.
War, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military.
The topic will be the space-based economy, the practical implications. So I want to welcome, without further ado, Mrs. Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts.
Thank you. It was fascinating. I was in the ladies' room and I heard Jay say, "Okay, we're about to begin." I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. Okay, so you know me, Miss Money. My topic is money. We're going to be talking about the space-based economy. And let me just describe what we're going to say. First, I want to thank the incredible people of Bastrop, Texas, and the greater Austin area. This is, for those of you who know me, I live in Tennessee, and I think the Heartland is getting really very competitive in America. But this is an area that brings together the most sophisticated technology in the world with great down-home America values. I was driving to the motel last night. I don't know if anybody said it. Did you see the Halloween parade? What a great community. And this is a fabulous facility, so I just want to give them a round of applause. Do you have a water? Oh, it's down there. Okay, so let's go over what we're going to talk about today. I came to this topic not because I was interested in space, but because I was looking for $4 trillion that had gone missing from the US government. And, you know, I had to follow it into space. I remember when I first got on Coast to Coast in 2005, I was following the money. And one of the things I said to them is, why?
Poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
First question. My second question, Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week. Question, please.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract? And how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top of my head, well, I would rather not. I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's not privileged information, is it?
I'm sure it's not.
Well, please. And we still have time, so please.
I would be glad to provide for the record. I don't want to talk from the top of my head.
Scope is hard to imagine. Republican Congressman Daryl Issa joining us now to help us figure out what this all means. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us for Happy Hour. I saw you quote it, you're using the analogy to the birth of Christ, that we wouldn't have spent as much money since his birth, that this big old bailout. Very interesting to come up with that.
Well, it's even worse than that. If we spent $1 million a day every day since the birth of